Welcome to another Mike Reads Reviews. Tonight we're going to be getting ourselves in trouble and delivering on my previous promise to review Andy Ngo's Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. This is a book that I read at your request, it's a book that had only just recently came out, I believe published in 2020, if not very late in 2021, if not very late in 2021. And on that note, I mentioned previously that I have been looking for an online bookstore. Well, I will put in this video's description a link to where I bought this book because I'm starting to really be pleased with this bookstore. It's called Thrift Books, and they're online at thriftbooks.com. It seems to be just as cheap and effective as a place to buy these books as the Big A, but without having to deal with all the political nonsense that is associated with dealing with the Big A. And it doesn't seem like Thrift Books is completely consumed by some nonsense politic. So if you guys are looking for a bookstore like I was, I can go ahead and at this point feel confident in recommending thriftbooks.com. So check that out. So on to our review of the book that's going to get me in trouble for reviewing it. First things first, we always do, we talk about what the book is. And the book is nothing more than a journalistic entry, purely journalistic foray into a reporting on what Antifa is, what they've done, especially over the course of the past year, but also their history and how they have originated in history and their Weimar Republic origins in the 1930s and how that eventually made its way to the United States and what that means for us today in terms of what they have done over the last year or so. And this is real. Antifa isn't just an idea. It is a group of people, and Andy Ngo evidences this. He doesn't just make claims, he evidences them. As far as the read is concerned, and this is going to begin basically the review part of things, not that long of a read. At 239 pages, it was incredibly digestible, so it's written in very much common parlance. Now, like I said, it's not written in prose. It's written as basically journalistic reporting. So when he calls people communists in this book, he's not using that to necessarily disparage them. It's because it's a way of describing these people in a manner that reflects how they describe themselves and in a manner that reflects their behavior. So it's not him in introducing opinion on that matter. And there is some opinion in this book, but it's very, very limited. Everything is actually well-sourced. Yes, most of his sources are Twitter, but that's because a lot of what he's doing is saying, listen, this is what these groups are saying on Twitter. This is Rose City Antifa's actual Twitter account, and this is what they actually said on Twitter. And that is important, because it builds towards, it evidences their own narrative. It evidences their own claims. This is what they are claiming, so this is where they fall under things. It goes into great detail on Andy's personal experience, which is extremely well documented. And speaking of which, as far as the extremely well documented things are concerned, he actually includes photographs of all of these things. Well, not everything that he mentions, but in each chapter begins with a series of photographs of the destructive nature of Antifa, with the exception of one chapter, which we'll get to in just a moment. As far as my opinion on the thing is concerned, I think it's extremely well written in terms of how it's presented. I think the credibility here is totally off the charts. This is one of my all-time favorite reads instantaneously. And what I was finding, you guys know I'm a slow reader. I was finding that in one sitting, I was easily getting through 50 pages in one sitting. And I had to actively tell myself to stop reading because it's enthralling. That's the word I would use to describe the book. Full-on enthralling. So it's captivating, but most importantly, it's enthralling. It sucks you in a way that I just the last time I was this seduced by a book, if you will, was with Thomas Paine's Common Sense. And I told you in that review, which I'll link in this video's description, that I was literally fist pumping throughout the course of that read. I wasn't quite at that point with this read, but man, I was on the brink of it. Now, that said, as far as the actual writing is concerned, Andy Ngo starts with an introduction, and that introduction, which is technically barely part of the content of the book, is written in prose. This is an actual narration of the story of the events that preceded and included and followed Antifa's physical and violent attack on him. He is better off as a journalist, in my opinion. So the introduction was kind of a bear to get through because his narrative style was in my opinion, kind of weak. And if Andy Ngo ever decided to enter into the world of fictional writing, I probably wouldn't buy his books because his prose is not nearly as good as his who, what, when, where, why, as his journalistic entry. And again, there's a clear structure to everything. The chapters are broken up in a manner that is intuitive. And everything is, again, extremely well sourced. So I mentioned that I really like dry reads. This isn't that dry a read because the content, all you have to do is say who, what, when, where, why, and it's like, whoa. So it'll take you back. It will take you aback just by doing the who, what, when, where, why, and not really injecting or infusing opinion into the thing. So I talked about not injecting opinion and into the content. There's one place where Andy did that, and that was in his afterword. And in that afterword, a huge part of that afterward is the story of his parents who fled communist China, eventually made their way to the United States, absolutely destitute, and were able to bring Andy and his siblings, I think it's actually one sibling, up the way that they wound up bringing them up. And now Andy is comfortable, well off, well situated, financially at least. And it's a great story of that starts off in Vietnam before the communists took over the part of Vietnam where his parents were living. And it talks about the transitory period, the post-communist era. It talks about how they had to flee through other countries to get to the United States in the first place, and that when they got here, they had nothing and were able to bring themselves up because of the opportunities that are available to people here in the United States. It's a great story of how the situation you are born in doesn't predetermine exactly the situation you will wind up finding yourself in throughout the entirety of the course of your life, if you're willing to do certain things that will allow you to get out of, say, the destitution that Andy's parents found themselves in when they came to the United States. That part, if you guys could share this video, that would be really helpful, because that part of the story is such a great story that I would love to see it be made a movie. And unfortunately, because it's Andy Ngo's story, there's only one place that's producing cinematic features that will touch this, and it's the Daily Wire. So not to plug Ben Shapiro or anything, guys, but I know that I'm getting some new subscribers. I know that you guys are actually watching my videos, and I really appreciate it. The thing that I would love for you guys to do with this video is to share it, because, and I may have to do another video that's just a read of Andy Ngo's parents' story in the afterword, because it's such a good story. We have got to see this be made a movie. I would love to see the Daily Wire presents Boat People, which is going to wind up being the story of Andy Ngo's mother and father and their fleeing of communist Vietnam for the freedom that we have here in the United States. So in very short, this book was an excellent read. It was an extremely digestible read. There really isn't much negative to say here. There is one thing that I'll have to point out, and I can't do this review without saying, and that is it needed another round of copy editing. The number of grammatical errors, the number of obvious, we'll call them typographical errors, the number of just basic English errors that clearly aren't that, like, Andy Ngo doesn't understand English. It's just, these are the type of things when you have 239 pages, you're going to find some of these throughout the course of various drafts that should have gone through another round of copy editing. And it was enough of a problem for me to mention in this video. So folks, when you go to buy this book and you read a sentence and you're like, did that make any sense? Let me reread that. It may well be because this book really needed another round of copy editing. Excuse me. And because of that, and because of how poor Andy's prose is in the few places that he uses the prose, and the fact that it's kind of a hyper-specific topic that he goes into great detail, but it's not like Solzhenitsyn here. We're not talking about the Gulag Archipelago. Now, that said, in raising the literal red flag that is this book, Andy Ngo is probably, in my opinion, he's going to be seen as this generation's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. But again, Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago was 1,700 pages long, and this is 239. So I love concision. I think Andy could have gone into greater detail. I kind of almost wish he'd held off this book for another few months so he could get the last, there's about another 2 or 3 months of history that I wish he could have gotten into, but the book was published before that information existed. So as far as that's concerned, it's kind of like Idiocracy, the movie, to me, where I think everyone should see Idiocracy. To me, it's as far as living in the United States today, if you call yourself an American, you haven't seen Idiocracy, you need to go see Idiocracy. But also, Idiocracy is a movie I give on IMDb like a 7 out of 10. So it's kind of like that. It's not like, I think I gave, I want to say I gave Common Sense a 10 out of 10. I really want to give this a 10. But again, the points that I talked about that detract from it, it's hard for me to give it a 10. So I'll close with, I'll actually have to dive on the hand grenade and give it an actual number here. And as I always do, I'll close with a rating on a scale, a numerical rating on a scale of 1 to 10. And you know what? I'm going to get myself in trouble. Why not? I'm going to call this book a full-on 10. It's going to be the weakest 10 that I've ever given out, but I'm in a good mood today and I want to get myself in trouble. So do go check out this book. Definitely a book I can recommend. In fact, it's one of the most recommendable books that I have read on this channel. So if you get any book on this channel, man, this is one of the books to get for sure. And I'll have to do it again, another video on the story of Andy No's parents. Well, I'll just read that section and I may have to put out a tier list at some point. So check out for that. Check out, stay in tune for that video of the most recommendable books that I have on this channel. Maybe it won't be a tier list, but I'll have to put out a video of the 3 or 4 books that I most highly recommend that I've read on this channel. So stay tuned for that. So that's been my review of Andy No's Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. Good night.